The lake lay hidden in the hills far from the noise of the city. Around it the land was green and open with tall grass that swayed in the wind. Trees stood at the edges like quiet watchers. The water was deep and calm, shining in the sunlight, as if holding its own secret. It never froze even when winter brought ice to the streams nearby. People in the town spoke of it only in passing. Few ever went there. Nas had been visiting the lake since he was a boy. He liked the stillness. No roads led here, except for a narrow dirt path that wound between the hills. When he came, he felt as if the world outside had faded away. There was an old wooden pier that reached into the water. It had been there for longer than anyone could remember. The boards were worn smooth by time and weather. That morning the air was cool and the sky clear. Tomas stood at the end of the pier, looking across the water. The wind moved gently through his hair. He could hear the soft lap of the water against the wood. For a long while he only watched the light dance on the surface. Then something unusual caught his eye. In the reflection of the sky, he saw a shape beneath the water. At first, it seemed like a shadow from a cloud, but no cloud passed overhead. The shape was sharp and straight-edged, unlike any rock or natural mound. Tomas leaned over the edge of the pier and squinted. The water was clear enough to see the faint outline of something rising from the lake bed. It looked like the tip of a stone peak. Tomas felt a stir of curiosity. He had been to the lake many times, but had never seen this shape. Perhaps the light had never struck the water in quite this way before. He stepped back and considered what he had seen. A thought began to form. The edges were too even for nature. They looked made by hands. The wind grew still for a moment. Without the ripples, the water became a glassy mirror. The shape came into sharper view. It was a point of stone, and it seemed to rise higher than before, as if the lake wanted him to see it. His heart beat a little faster. He knew of no building or ruin in this place. What could be hiding under the surface? The sun was climbing higher now. Tomas knelt down and dipped his hand into the water. It was cold, though not as biting as other lakes in the area. He let the water slip through his fingers and wondered how deep it was at that spot. He decided he would come back later with a boat to see for himself. He stayed a while longer, breathing in the quiet air. A bird called from the trees, and the sound carried across the water. It felt as if the lake was holding its breath. Tomas thought of the old stories his grandfather once told him. Stories of strange things found in forgotten places. Most people had laughed at them. But here, standing above this still and endless blue, he wondered if they had been more than just stories on. The walk back down the path, he kept glancing over his shoulder at the lake. The image of that sharp point stayed in his mind. He told himself it was just a stone ridge or perhaps a pile of rock from a landslide long ago. Yet another part of him whispered that it was something else, something waiting that night. Tomas sat at his small wooden table in the dim light of his lamp. The sound of crickets came through the open window. He poured a cup of tea, but hardly touched it. His thoughts kept circling back to the lake. He imagined the shape, not as a simple rock, but as the top of a hidden structure. Perhaps it was old beyond memory. Perhaps no one alive had seen it before. The idea filled him with both excitement and uneasy. He pulled out a worn map of the area. The lake was marked, but no details were given. There were no signs of old towns or ruins nearby, just empty hills and forest. He tapped the map with his finger. If something was there under the water, it might have been hidden for hundreds, maybe thousands of years. The next morning, Tomas rose early. The sun had just begun to light the horizon. He strapped a small boat to the roof of his old truck and set out for the lake. The road was quiet and empty. When he reached the end of the dirt path, he carried the boat down to the pier. The air smelled fresh, and the surface of the lake was like polished stone. As he pushed off from the pier, the boat rocked gently. Tomas rowed slowly, letting the oars dip and rise in a steady rhythm. He kept his eyes fixed on the water ahead, watching for the strange shape. The sunlight slid over the waves, and for a moment he thought he had lost sight of it. Then it appeared again directly below the boat, sharper and larger than he had imagined. It was not just a peak. The stone sloped down on all sides, forming smooth, even lines. The water distorted the image, but he could see that it was a man-made structure. The top was flat, with carvings that looked like symbols, though he could not make them out from above. He felt a strange pull, as if the lake wanted him to come closer. He leaned over the side and stared down into the blue depth. A faint shimmer seemed to rise from the stone, as if the sunlight was answering it. The boat drifted slowly above the hidden structure, and Tomas felt sure now that he had found something ancient. Whatever it was, it had been waiting under this water for a very long time. As the breeze stirred and the ripples returned, the shape blurred again. But in Tomas's mind, the image was clear and sharp. This was no ordinary rock. It was the beginning of something larger, something that would soon draw him deeper into the mystery of the lake. The morning sky was pale gold when Tomas returned to the lake. He had not slept much. The strange shape beneath the water had stayed in his mind all night. He kept seeing it every time he closed his eyes. He had told no one about what he had found. This secret felt too heavy to share before he knew the truth. The lake was quiet again. The air was cool and smelled of wet grass. Tomas set his small boat into the water and climbed inside. He had brought with him a coil of rope awaited, anchor, and a waterproof lantern. If the shape was what he thought it might be, he would try to see it from closer than before. He rowed toward the middle of the lake. The water was still and glassy, reflecting the hills in the sky. The only sound was the soft splash of the oars. As he reached the spot where he had seen the shape yesterday, he slowed his strokes and looked down. The morning light cut deep into the water, and there it was again, rising from the depths. The pointed tip looked sharper in the clear light. Tomas dropped the small anchor to keep the boat from drifting. He tied the rope to the anchor and then looped the other end around his waist. He checked the lantern, making sure it was sealed tight and ready. The water below was darker here, but he could see faint lines on the stone far below. He took a deep breath and slid into the water. The cold surrounded him at once, and the world above vanished into ripples and shifting light. He kicked downward, slowly feeling the rope tighten a little as he went deeper. The pyramid shape grew larger until it filled most of his vision. Its surface was smooth but not plain. There were marks carved into the stone. At first he thought they were cracks, but when he reached them, he saw they were lines and shapes carved with care. The carvings were simple but strange. Some looked like stars, others like tall figures with long arms. There were also patterns like waves and circles. As he touched one of the lines, a faint glow spread along the carving. It was soft golden light that pulsed as if alive. Tomas pulled back in surprise. The glow faded slowly but did not disappear completely. He swam along the slope of the structure. It was much larger than he had guessed from the surface. The sides slanted evenly down into the darkness where the lake bed must have been. On one side, near the base, he found a rectangular outline in the stone. It was not a normal block. It looked like a door. The door had no handle, but it was framed by more carvings. These carvings glowed faintly even before he touched them. The glow was steady like the light of the lantern in his hand. Tomas felt his chest tighten, not from the water, but from the strange feeling that the pyramid was aware of him. He pressed his palm against the door. At once the water around him seemed to warm. A deep sound rolled through the lake like the beat of a distant drum. The light in the carvings brightened, and the door outline began to shimmer. Tomas felt a vibration travel up his arm and into his chest. The door shifted inward without any sound. Beyond it was a dark opening, large enough for him to swim through. For a moment, Tomas hesitated. The opening led into complete darkness. He could not see what lay beyond. The lake was already strange, and this seemed like a step into another world. But his curiosity was stronger than his fear. He raised the lantern and let its beam cut into the shadows. The light revealed a tunnel of smooth stone leading downward at a gentle slope. The walls were marked with more carvings, and they glowed faintly as if guiding the way Tomas swam inside. The water felt warmer here, and his body moved easily. The tunnel was quiet except for the sound of his own breathing. After some distance, the tunnel widened, and the water level rose toward a space where he could see air above. He swam upward and broke through the surface, gasping softly. The lantern light danced across smooth stone walls and a high ceiling. He was inside a hidden chamber under the lake. He pulled himself onto a flat stone ledge. The floor was dry and warm under his hands. The air was still and carried a faint scent of earth and stone. Light came not only from his lantern, but from the carvings themselves. They ran in long lines along the walls and shone like gold threads. The shapes were clearer here. They showed humans standing beside tall beings with narrow faces and long arms. There were also pictures of ships with wide wings sailing among stars. Thomas walked slowly around the chamber. His footsteps echoed softly. The more he looked, the more certain he became that this was not a natural place. It had been built with skill and purpose. Every stone fit perfectly with the next. The air was fresh, as if it had been kept for someone to breathe. Even after many years, he stopped in front of a tall panel of carvings. At its center was a circle surrounded by smaller shapes like stars. Lines connected them in a pattern he could not understand. Below the circle were more human figures holding objects in their hands. The objects looked like crystals. He wondered if they were keys or tools. A thought passed through his mind. If this place had been here for so long, hidden under the lake, what else could be hidden in other parts of the world? And why had it been built here so far from towns and roads? He felt as if he had stepped into a story far older than his own. Thomas sat down on the ledge. The air was warm and still. The silence seemed deep enough to last forever. But he knew he could not stay long. He needed to return to the surface before he grew too tired. He looked around once more, fixing every detail in his mind. The glowing carvings, the tall stone walls, the strange shapes that spoke of other worlds. When he slid back into the water, the warmth of the chamber gave way to the coolness of the lake. He swam back through the tunnel and out into the open water. The doorway remained open behind him, its carvings glowing faintly as if waiting for his return. As he rose toward the sunlight above, the thought stayed with him that the lake was no longer just a place of quiet. It was the keeper of a secret older than anyone in the hills. When Tomas pulled himself back into the boat, he sat for a long moment, catching his breath. The water around him looked the same as before, but he knew now what lay beneath. The secret was real, and he felt certain this was only the beginning. The next day, the hills were covered in a thin morning mist. Tomas stood at the back of his truck, checking the small diving gear he had borrowed from a friend. His mind was still full of the glowing carvings and the warm hidden chamber he had found under the lake. He knew he had to go back, but this time he would not go alone. There was one person he trusted with something like this. Her name was Mara. She was quiet and thoughtful, and she had a love for old stories and forgotten languages. Thomas had known her since they were children. If anyone could make sense of the carvings, it would be her. When Mara arrived, she carried a small waterproof bag. Inside were notebooks, pencils, and a camera sealed in a case. She listened carefully as Thomas told her about the pyramid shape under the water, the glowing carvings, and the strange door that had opened when he touched it. Mara's eyes did not show doubt, only a growing spark of curiosity. They set the boat in the water and rowed toward the center of the lake. The mist was lifting, and the surface shone pale silver in the early light. Tomas stopped the boat at the same spot as before. The water was still and deep. He told Mara to look over the side. She leaned forward and stared into the water for a long moment. Then she nodded. She could see the faint point of the stone rising from below. Tomas checked the rope around his waist. Mara did the same. They took their lanterns and slipped into the cool water together. The world above vanished in ripples and light. The pyramid grew larger as they swam downward, its sharp lines glowing faintly as before. The carvings lit up under their touch, leading them toward the base where the door waited. The carvings around the door glowed brighter when Tomas pressed his hand to the stone. The water warmed, and the deep sound rolled through the lake again like a slow drumbeat. The door shimmered and shifted open, revealing the tunnel beyond. Mara's eyes widened, but she followed Tomas inside without hesitation. The tunnel felt the same as before. Smooth walls marked with glowing lines that guided their way. The water was warmer here, almost pleasant to swim through. Soon they reached the wide chamber where air waited above. They rose to the surface and climbed onto the stone ledge. Mara stood still for a moment, taking in the sight. Her gaze swept over the tall stone walls, the glowing lines, the shapes of people and beings carved into the stone. She ran her fingers over the carvings, tracing the lines of the symbols. Her lips moved as if she was speaking to herself, but her voice was too soft for Tomas to hear. After a while, she turned to him. "Some of these are not just pictures," she said. "They are words in a very old form. I have seen similar marks in books about lost coastal tribes. But these are even older." Tomas watched her take out a notebook and begin to copy some of the carvings. The glowing lines seemed to pulse gently as she worked, as if they knew someone was reading them again after a very long time. Mara moved to the tall panel with the circle surrounded by stars. She studied it for a long while, then drew the shapes exactly as they were. "These lines tell a story," she said at last. "Long ago there were travelers from far away. They came from the sky, but something happened to trap them here. The sky turned dangerous, and they could not return. They worked with the people of this land to build places where they could hide and keep their knowledge safe. This place under the lake was one of them." Tomas listened in silence. He felt the chamber itself was listening too. The air seemed warmer, now the light a little brighter. Mara moved to another wall where ships with wide wings were carved above waves. "This part speaks of a warning," she said. "It tells of something that would return from the sky one day. The travelers left messages so that if it happened again, the people here would be ready." The words sank into Tomas's mind. He thought of the glowing carvings, the strange warmth of the water, and the deep sound that came when the door opened. This was no simple ruin. It was a message left for those who would come much later, perhaps for people like him. And Mara looked around the chamber again, her eyes sharp with thought. "If there are more places like this," she said, "then they might all hold parts of the same story. And if the warning is real, then it was meant to be heard by people." Now, not only those in the past. Tomas felt a shiver despite the warmth. He remembered the images on the carvings of humans standing beside the tall beings. There was no sign of fear in those pictures, only unity as they worked together. If such a thing had happened once, perhaps it could happen again. But why had the travelers hidden themselves? And what exactly was the shadow they had feared? They spent more time in the chamber, while Mara copied as much as she could. The walls seemed endless in their detail. When they finally decided to leave, they swam back through the tunnel into the cool water of the lake. The door slid closed behind them without a sound. By the time they reached the surface, the mist had fully lifted, and the hills were bright in the sunlight. They pulled themselves back into the boat. The lake looked calm and peaceful as always. Yet Tomas knew it was no longer the same to him. Under that quiet surface lay a place built with purpose long before his time. A place holding a story that had waited in silence for many ages. As they rowed back to shore, Mara kept her notebook close. She said little, but Tomas could see her mind working. He felt the same restless pull. The carvings had shown them a glimpse of something far bigger than the lake or even the hills around it. And though they had left the chamber behind, he knew they would both return. When they reached the shore, Tomas tied the boat and looked back at the lake. The sunlight sparkled on the water, but the image in his mind was of the glowing stone walls and the quiet figures carved into them. Something had been hidden here for a reason, and now that reason was drawing them closer to a truth they could not yet see. The next morning, the sky was a soft gray. The lake lay still as if waiting. Tomas and Mara stood on the pier checking their gear. Both had slept little. The carvings they had seen and the words Mara had read kept turning in their minds. Today, they had decided to go deeper into the chamber. Mara wanted to see if the story on the walls continued beyond what they had already explored. Tomas wanted to know if the pyramid held something more than carvings and light. They set the boat in the water and rowed to the same place. The air was cool and the hills seemed distant and quiet. When they reached the spot above the pyramid, the water was as calm as glass. Tomas and Mara put on their masks and slipped into the water. The cold wrapped around them, but soon the faint glow from the carvings below appeared like a warm welcome. They swam down to the base, where the door waited. As before, Tomas pressed his hand to the stone. The carvings brightened and the deep sound rolled through the water. The door shimmered and moved aside. They swam into the tunnel, guided by the golden glow along the walls. Soon they rose into the air chamber and climbed onto the stone ledge. The space felt different today. The air seemed warmer, the light from the carvings more alive. Mara walked along the wall, tracing the story further than before. Tomas followed, but his eyes were drawn to a narrow passage at the far end of the chamber. It sloped gently downward, into a space they had not yet explored. "We should see what is down there," Tomas said. Mara glanced at the passage and nodded. They took their lanterns and stepped carefully along the smooth stone floor. The walls here were covered in more carvings, but these showed no people. Instead, they showed tall towers, strange machines, and a sky filled with shapes that looked like wings and arcs of light. The passage opened into a second chamber, smaller than the first. The light here came not only from the carvings, but from something at the very center. On a round stone table stood a crystal sphere about the size of a melon. It gave off a faint glow, and inside it a swirl of light moved slowly, as if a live Tomas stepped closer. The air around the sphere felt warmer, almost like the warmth of the sun through glass. Mara followed and studied the carvings around the table. "These are different," she said quietly. "They show the travelers giving something to the humans." She pointed to a carving of a tall figure holding a glowing sphere toward a human who reached for it. Around them were symbols of stars and circles. Tomas reached out and let his fingertips rest lightly on the smooth surface of the sphere. The moment he touched it, a sudden rush of images filled his mind. He saw a sky full of stars, then great ships with wide wings flying among them. He saw humans and tall beings working side by side, building towers and strange craft. Then the scene changed to a sky turning dark as if a great shadow had spread across it. The travelers' ships were breaking apart in storms of light. The humans were helping them hide, carrying the glowing spheres into places deep underwater. And sand and images faded, but the warmth of the sphere remained in his hands. Tomas stepped back and looked at Mara. She had not moved, watching him carefully. "What did you see?" she asked. He told her in simple words, and she listened without interrupting. When he finished, she looked back at the carvings. "This sphere is more than a message," Mara said. "It might be a key or a signal." The travelers must have left it here for someone to find. Maybe for us. She touched the sphere lightly, and her eyes widened as if she too saw something. Though she said nothing at first, after a moment she spoke again. The carvings also show something else. She pointed to a panel that showed a dark shape among the stars. The shape was long and jagged, surrounded by lines that looked like fire. The travelers called it the shadow. It was the reason they could not return home, and they feared it would come here one day. This fear might be the way to call for help, or to warn others when it does. Thomas felt a chill even in the warm air of the chamber. The shadow in the carving was unlike anything he had seen, yet it felt real in a way he could not explain. He thought of the still lake above them and the quiet hills around. It seemed impossible that such a danger could reach here. But if the travelers had built this place to last for ages, they must have believed the danger was certain. They stayed in the chamber for a while, studying every carving in detail. The sphere's light pulsed softly as if it was alive. Thomas felt as if it was aware of their presence. He wondered if taking it away from this place would be safe. Mara thought it should stay until they understood more. She made careful notes and drew the carvings, especially the ones showing the shadow and the travelers' work with humans. When they finally turned back toward the first chamber, the sphere's glow dimmed slightly, almost like a goodbye. They walked through the passage and into the larger space, then dove back into the water. The tunnel carried them to the lake, and the door closed silently behind them. As they swam upward, the cold returned, and soon the sunlight broke across their faces. They pulled themselves into the boat, breathing hard. The lake was calm and quiet once more. But for Thomas and Mara, the calm was only on the surface. They now knew there was something beneath them that carried a warning from a time beyond memory. And in the heart of the pyramid, the sphere waited for the day its light would be needed on the way back to shore. Neither of them spoke much. They both understood that this was no ordinary discovery. It was the kind of secret that could change the way people saw the world. Thomas rowed steadily, the sound of the oars echoing across the water. Mara held her notebook close, and in her mind she could still see the shadow carved into the stone. The hills rose around them as they reached the shore, green and peaceful under the gray sky. But in both their hearts there was a new weight, and a sense that the lake was no longer just a quiet place. It was the keeper of a secret that belonged not only to the past but to the future as well. The rain had passed during the night, and the morning air was fresh with the smell of wet grass. Thomas walked along the dirt path to the small cabin where Mara lived. She had been studying the carvings from the pyramid since they returned. When she opened the door, she looked tired, but her eyes were bright with discovery. On the table before her were notebooks filled with drawings and lines of careful notes. Beside them lay a map of the hills and the lake. She motioned for Thomas to sit, and then began to speak in a calm voice. Though there was an edge of urgency in her words, "I think I understand more of the story now," she said. The carvings were not just history. They were instructions. They tell how the travelers and humans worked together when the sky turned dangerous. The travelers had seen a threat long before it reached this world. They called it the shadow. It moved between the stars, destroying what it found. No one knew where it came from. Mara turned one of her notebooks toward Thomas. On the page was a copy of a carving showing a great arc of dark shapes crossing a field of stars. Lines of symbols ran along the bottom. She pointed to them. "This part says the shadow feeds on the life and warmth of worlds. It leaves them cold and empty." The travelers feared it would find Earth, so they built places to hide their knowledge and tools. The pyramid under the lake is one of those places. Thomas listened in silence. The air in the cabin felt heavier as he looked at the page. He remembered the sphere in the heart of the pyramid and the strange warmth it gave. "What about the sphere?" he asked. Mara nodded. "That is the key," she said. "It can send a signal, but it will only work when the shadow is close. The travelers made it so it would not waste its strength. The carvings say the signal will call out to any allies still among the stars. If none answer, it will awaken the places built on Earth and use their power to fight. Tomas leaned back in his chair. The thought of such a thing finding Earth felt like something from a dream, yet the carvings and the sphere were real. He thought of the calm lake hiding this warning for so long. What if the shadow never comes? He asked. Then the sphere will sleep forever, Mara said softly. But the carvings also warn that time moves in cycles. The shadow has come before, and it may come again. They sat for a while in the quiet cabin, the sound of birds in the wet trees outside. Mara rolled up the map and put it into her bag. We need to keep this safe, she said. Not just the notes, but the knowledge of the place itself. If others find it and do not understand, they might damage it or try to take the sphere. It must be ready for when it is truly needed, Tomas agreed. Yet a part of him wondered if they should tell someone who could protect it. But he also knew such secrets often brought trouble. For now, they decided to return to the pyramid only to learn more, not to disturb it. Later that day, they rode out again. The sun was bright, and the lake glittered like silver. As they swam down into the cool water and the glowing carvings came into view, Tomas felt the same strange pull as before. The door opened to them easily, and soon they stood again in the chamber. Mara went straight to the wall she had studied before, her fingers tracing the lines of symbols. She moved slowly, reading them under her breath. Tomas watched the light of the carvings ripple faintly under her touch. She stopped at a section they had not noticed before. The figures here showed humans standing in a ring around the sphere. Above them were shapes like streams of light rising into the sky. This part is important, she said. The carvings say that when the signal is sent, the sphere will also give its knowledge to the ones who awaken it. It will guide them in what must be done. Tomas thought about that. Knowledge could be as powerful as any weapon. If the sphere truly held the wisdom of the travelers, then it could change everything humans knew about the stars. He stepped closer to the table where the sphere rested. The soft swirl of light inside seemed to move faster when he approached. He did not touch it, but he felt the warmth reach his skin. Mara took out her camera and carefully captured the carvings. Then she sat and wrote for some time in her notebook. Tomas walked slowly around the chamber, his eyes tracing the scenes on the walls. He found one that made him stop. It showed the tall beings leaving through the sky in a ship while humans stood below, looking up. The lines suggested both farewell and hope. He wondered if any of those travelers had ever returned. When Mara finished her work, they left the chamber and swam back to the surface. The hills stood quiet in the afternoon light as they rowed to shore. Tomas kept glancing back at the center of the lake. It looked peaceful, yet under that calm water lay a story of danger and trust written in stone and light. As they pulled the boat onto the shore, Mara spoke in a thoughtful voice. I think there are more places like this, she said. The carvings mentioned the desert, the ice, and the deep forest. If the travelers built more shelters, they might still be out there, waiting. Tomas nodded slowly. The idea of searching for them felt both exciting and heavy with responsibility. But first they had to decide how to protect the one they had found. The sun was lowering when they left the lake. The sky turned gold above the hills, and the water reflected it in ripples. Tomas knew that from this day on, every time he saw the lake he would remember the glowing walls, the warm air of the chamber, and the sphere that waited in silence. And he knew the message left there was no longer forgotten. A soft wind moved through the hills as Tomas and Mara made their way to the lake once more. The sky was pale and the morning air cool. They had returned many times now, but today felt different. Mara had been studying the last carvings she photographed. One of them showed the sphere with its light shining brighter than before, and shapes of lines reaching far into the sky. She believed it meant the sphere could awaken fully, but only under certain conditions. When they reached the pier, the lake was still. The reflection of the hills and the pale clouds lay clear on its surface. They set the boat into the water and rowed to the center. Thomas felt a quiet tension, as if the place itself knew they were coming. The calm of the lake seemed heavier, almost waiting. They slipped into the water. The coolness closed over them, and the world above faded away. Down below, the pyramid glowed faintly as always, its lines sharp and perfect. They reached the base, touched the carvings, and the door opened with its slow shimmer. The deep sound rolled through the water, and they swam into the tunnel. Soon they rose into the warm air of the chamber. The golden glow from the walls felt stronger today. The patterns along the stones seemed to ripple gently like sunlight on water. Mara looked around with quiet wonder. "It is brighter," she said. Thomas nodded. He could feel the change, too. They walked toward the narrow passage leading to the smaller chamber where the sphere rested. As they entered, Thomas saw at once that the sphere was different. The swirl of light inside was moving faster, and faint arcs of pale color flickered through it. The warmth in the air had grown, and a soft hum filled the space. Mara stepped forward and studied it closely. She did not touch it yet. The carvings around the table seemed clearer, as if the lines had been traced again. She glanced at Thomas. "I think it is awake," she said quietly. "Maybe it knows we are here again." Thomas reached out slowly and let his hand rest on the smooth surface. The hum grew deeper, and the sphere's light flared. In an instant, his vision filled with scenes. He was no longer in the chamber, but far above the earth, looking down on oceans and land. Then the view shifted, and he saw the blackness of space. Out of that dark came a long shadow, not a shape of a single object, but a mass of moving forms. They flowed together like smoke, but held edges like jagged rock. Lights blinked within them. Cold and sharp, the shadow moved across the stars, passing by broken fragments of ships and lifeless worlds. Thomas could feel the emptiness it left behind. Then the image shifted again. He saw the earth far away, small and bright against the dark. The shadow was moving toward it slowly, but without pause the vision faded, and Thomas was back in the chamber, his breath unsteady. Mara's hand was on his arm. "What did you see?" she asked. He told her in simple words, and her face grew tense. She placed her hand on the sphere, and her eyes went distant. After a moment she pulled back, her voice low. "I saw the same. The shadow is real, and it is moving toward us." The hum of the sphere continued, steady and calm, as if it had no fear of what it showed. Mara looked at the carvings again. She found a set of symbols beneath the image of the sphere. These say the key will guide its keepers. It will show them where to go and what to do. It will awaken other places like this one so they can stand together. Thomas frowned. Other places. The desert, the ice, and the deep forest, he said. "That means there are more pyramids or shelters." Mara nodded. "And if they all have tools or knowledge, then together they might stop the shadow. But we have to find them first." The idea felt heavy. The earth was wide, and these places might be hidden as carefully as the pyramid under the lake. But Thomas felt a strange certainty that the sphere could help. He looked at it again. The swirl of light seemed to shift into faint shapes that almost looked like land and water. It reminded him of a map. He stepped closer, trying to see it clearly. The shapes were gone in an instant, but the thought stayed with him. Mara seemed to have seen the same. "If this is a map," she said, "then the sphere is showing us where to look. Maybe only when it is awake will it reveal the path. And if it is awake now, then the shadow must be close enough to trigger it." They stayed in the smaller chamber for a while, watching the sphere. It did not speak in words, but its presence filled the space. Thomas felt as if it was aware of them in a way beyond sight or sound. Mara continued to study the carvings, copying more symbols into her notebook. When she finished, they turned back toward the main chamber. Before leaving, Thomas looked over his shoulder one last time. The sphere's glow followed them faintly, as though seeing them off. The hum grew softer as they moved through the tunnel and out into the water. When the door closed behind them, the lake's cool silence returned. They rose to the surface and climbed into the boat. The wind had picked up slightly, and small ripples moved across the lake. Tomas rowed back toward the shore, while Mara sat deep in thought, her notebook on her knees. She was already planning their next steps, speaking quietly about how they might track the other places mentioned in the carvings. As they pulled the boat onto the shore, Thomas looked back at the water. The calm surface gave no sign of the vision he had seen, but in his mind, the image of the shadow in space remained sharp. It was coming, and though it might still be far away, it was no longer just a story carved into stone. It was a path already. Moving toward them, the hills seemed peaceful in the afternoon light, but Tomas and Mara now carried a truth that made the world feel different. Somewhere beneath the quiet sky, a danger was on its way. And deep under the lake, the heart of the pyramid had begun to beat again. The morning sun rose over the hills, turning the lake's surface into a sheet of gold. Tomas stood at the edge of the pier, looking out across the calm water. He could see no sign of the pyramid beneath, but he felt its presence all the same. The vision from the sphere had not left his mind. The image of the shadow in space moved behind his thoughts like a distant storm behind him. Mara arrived carrying her bag of notes. She looked more serious than usual. They had spent the last 2 days thinking, talking, and arguing quietly about what to do next. The choice before them was not simple. Mara set the bag down and stood beside Tomas. "If we tell people," she said, "we risk the wrong ones finding it first. They might try to take the sphere or use it without understanding. If we keep it a secret, we may lose time, and the shadow will not wait." Thomas nodded. The thought of strangers in the chamber made him uneasy. It was not a place for greed or carelessness. And yet, the carvings had made it clear the sphere's purpose was to guide, not to hide forever. If they were to awaken other places like the pyramid under the lake, they could not do it alone. Mara opened her notebook and pointed to the symbols she had copied from the smaller chamber. These show the places the travelers built: the desert, the ice, and the deep forest. If we can reach them, we can prepare for the shadow. But the carvings also say the key must pass from keeper to keeper. That means the sphere must be with us when we go. Thomas thought about the journey. They would have to travel far, perhaps to parts of the world neither had seen. It would take time, and they did not know how close the shadow was. But the vision had shown it moving slowly, and maybe that gave them the chance they needed. They decided to return to the chamber one more time before making their choice. The lake was still and silent as they rowed across. The water closed over them, cool and clear. The pyramid's glow welcomed them as before. The door opened with its deep sound, and they swam through the tunnel into the warm air of the chamber. The sphere was waiting in the smaller room, its light steady and strong. Thomas stepped closer. The swirl inside shifted into faint shapes again, like a map. This time, the shapes were clearer 3 points of light connected by thin lines. Mara gasped softly. "The sphere is showing us where to go," she said. "These are the other places." They studied the glowing pattern until it faded back into the gentle swirl. The message was clear. The sphere wanted to lead them, but it was their choice to follow. Mara placed her hands on the table beside the sphere. "I think the travelers knew this moment would come. That is why the carvings spoke of the choice. It is not just about keeping the sphere safe. It is about deciding to act before it is too late." Thomas felt the weight of her words. They could leave the sphere where it was, hidden under the lake, and hope someone else would find it when the time came. Or they could take it with them and begin the search for the other hidden places. The first choice meant safety for now, but no guarantee for the future. The second meant risk, but also the chance to be ready. He looked around the chamber. The walls seemed to glow more warmly than before, as if the place itself waited for his answer. He thought of the quiet hills, the calm lake, and the sky above. All of it could vanish if the shadow came, and no one was prepared. "We take it, Tomas," said at last. "We follow the map." Mara's eyes met his, and she nodded. Then together they lifted the sphere from its stand. It was warm in their hands, and the hum inside it grew stronger. The golden glow of the chamber seemed to brighten, then slowly fade to its usual light. As if it was sending them on their way, they swam back through the tunnel with the sphere held between them. The water outside felt colder, and the weight of what they carried was more than just its size. When they reached the surface, the sun was high, and the light reflected off the water in sharp flashes as they rowed back to shore. The sphere sat between them, wrapped in a cloth to protect it. Mara kept glancing at it, her mind already on the journey ahead. Tomas rowed steadily, the sound of the oars mixing with the call of birds over the hills. On the shore, they loaded their gear into the truck. The road ahead was long, and they would have to plan carefully. But the map inside the sphere was clear in their minds. They would start with the closest point and follow the path the travelers had left before they left. Tomas walked back to the pier. He stood there for a moment, looking out at the lake one last time. The water was calm, hiding the pyramid beneath. It had been their secret for only a short while, but now it would send them far from here. He felt a quiet promise in his heart to return one day when the journey was done, and the shadow no longer threatened their world. Mara joined him, and together they looked across the shining water. Then they turned away, carrying the sphere toward the waiting road. The lake lay still behind them, a silent guardian of the past. Ahead, the world waited, wide and unknown. Somewhere out there, the other places were waiting too, and the shadow in the stars was still coming, but they would not face it unprepared.